Good morning and welcome to Morning Java, brought to you as always by our friends at the Get Go Cafe and Market, where, hey, they're still open. I mean, that's what I got.
Someplace has to be.
I know. I mean, there's something to be said for that. That might actually be the slogan. It's just, hey, we're actually open. Joined here, of course, by Hall of Famer Dave Molinari, as well as Hall of Famers Mike Lang and Jim Rutherford. These were bobbleheads that were given out this year. If you can't tell, Rutherford's actually on his phone. I guess he's making a trade.
And it was before the deadline, so.
Right. It's already an outdated bobblehead. It feels almost outdated to even be talking about anything hockey related, doesn't it?
It seems like it's been a long time since there was a hockey game played. Less than a week, but it seems like forever ago. It seems like we should be near the end of the off season.
Yeah, I'm picturing, I was out in Columbus. You were in Newark for the last actual game. Ever. You were out in Newark for the last game, and I'm out in Columbus, and the day before there was a practice, everything seemed normal, then all of a sudden everything's unraveling, and then Thursday comes along, and you're like, they're going to play this game in front of no people. I can tell you, you and I were, well, you were back home, and I got up in my hotel room that day. Dave, my brain never processed being inside Nationwide Arena with no people there for a hockey game. You know how you just can't visualize certain things.
You speak like a guy who's never been to a game in Sunrise.
Oh, nice.
Or for that matter, who wasn't around for the 83-84 Penguins.
That's right. Actually, I was partial season ticket holder for the 83-84 Penguins.
It was you.
It was me.
Yeah.
It was 1658 and 6. I know we can both do that record.
Obviously, that would have been very strange.
Would you do it?
Absolutely.
Really?
Wow. I think if it was necessary.
Meaning playing games with no people, because Gary Bettman has said that's an option.
And I think it's one that should be seriously considered. I think ultimately finances might play a big part in determining whether they go ahead with that, because you can't charge people for tickets that they're not allowed to use. But whether that would be outweighed by TV revenues or not, I don't know. But it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be normal. But these aren't normal times.
So the NHL, for anybody who doesn't know, relies way more on gate revenue than the other three major professional sports. They need people there. One of the topics that's come up in the NBA discussions about this is playing games, instead of having them in 20,000 seat empty arenas, but taking them to like the team's practice facilities and stuff. So I'm picturing like deciding Game 7 Penguins and Capitals, and it's in Cranberry, with like Seabass, Jean-Sebastian Aubin, who's like one of the workers up there, and like me and you and a couple other people.
Well, that's obviously crazy because the Capitals would have home ice advantage, so the game would be there.
Okay.
I can't really see the NHL doing that, if only because they would want the advertising on the boards from their their regular people. But if that's what it came down to, I don't, the competition wouldn't be the same as it would be with 20,000 people in the seats, but it would still be competition, and I would think that once guys get out there and a real game is going on, that they would play it like they would in any conventional venue.
Paul Maurice, and I know you and I share this sentiment. Paul Maurice is Winnipeg's head coach. If he's not the best quote in hockey, he's
very good.
He's something. He had a remark the other day to the Free Press up there where he just said that this is, until we have everything back to normal and we have fans back in the building, they're part of the experience, they're part of everything, that it just wouldn't be right. And I'm kind of in his corner in that regard. I want to see games too. I want to write about games. You want to write about games. But there isn't that comfort level, and that's what Maurice was getting at. You want people to be unbridled with their enthusiasm and joy and everything, and man, that just doesn't seem possible.
I think a modified game is better than no game.
So technically speaking, and by this I mean only technically, there's still a regular season to complete. No. I mean, no. That's just not going to happen.
No, I think that's pretty much an impossibility, if only because of arena availabilities. You have a lot of cities where the NHL and NBA teams share a building.
And concerts and shows and circuses and whatever.
Yes, and now when you have the CDC talking about going 8 weeks without crowds of 50 or more people, you're talking about both sports being pushed back a couple of months. I think you have to come up with some way to go directly into the playoffs, and probably in some modified form. I don't think you're going to have 4 rounds of best of 7, or you'll be playing hockey up until the day training.
But even then, Dave, the first step of this is that you got to pick who's in the playoffs. And if you looked at the Western Conference, you could do that rather easily, I think. I mean, you could just say, all right, here's, you can have some kind of single game play-in.
Absolutely.
Okay, for the 7 through 10 teams or whatever. In the East, that's very difficult. That pack from, I want to say it's from 6 to 11, is separated by just a handful of points. And some of them with games in hand. I believe the Florida Panthers have 2 games in hand on the pack. How?
That's why you don't rank them by points, you rank them by winning percentage. Or, percentage of possible points earned.
Yeah, but even then, if you had played more...
Then you have play-ins.
Okay, but how many and who's all included? And the better question is, how do you leave the Rangers out? That's really what this comes down to, because let's not pretend that it's not a factor that they're in New York,
No, I agree. But I think you can have as many one-game playoffs as you need to get down to 8 teams, and then you go into, at least in the early rounds, something shorter, maybe best of 3, maybe best of 5.
Now, you've, not to date you here or anything, but you've covered best of 5 series.
Yes.
So
and this is good, because I really didn't want to date you. But
that's what it's come to in this world. The Penguins and the Islanders played one of the greatest best of 5 series, arguably, in hockey history. I don't know that that's an overstatement, considering what almost happened. Not what happened, but what almost happened. Best of 5 series can be great.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a big fan of best of 3s. But, the Penguins played a pretty memorable one of those against Buffalo when George Ferguson scored the overtime game winner at Memorial Auditorium. Those can be good. Best of 5 is better, and best of 7 is best. But, a best of 3, it's a legitimate opportunity.
First round?
For the better team.
I guess what scares me about anything shorter than best of 5 for the first round, and this will elicit no tears from anybody who's watching, is that I'd hate to see the Lightning or Bruins or a team that was way up there in the regular season, have 2 crappy games and be done.
Sure, because it's not like the Lightning could ever get swept in 4 games by Columbus or anything.
Here it comes. I set it up like that on a tee for him. Yeah, the Lightning don't deserve any benefit of the doubt after getting swept by a team that had never won a playoff series ever.
And had it won a playoff game even.
No.
I mean,
Well, yeah, they won. They won a game against Pittsburgh. There you go. First ever playoff series victory for Columbus.
But no, I mean, teams have to adapt to whatever the circumstances are.
Yeah.
Do you give a team a break if its flight is delayed and so players don't get as much sleep as they would like? It's...
Yeah.
This is the highest level of pro hockey. You adapt to whatever you have to, and if it's too much for you to overcome, then that's your tough luck.
So the Penguins' social media, however you'd want to describe it, had Jake Gensel addressing fans. It's a really good idea. If there's one person you would think that the fans would, I'm saying this seriously, would most want to hear from, something that creates any kind of aura of positivity would be that, hey, if Jake Gensel would be back. I think we can agree on that, right? And we're talking about 2 months now.
It seems possible. The best case scenario was for him to return in late April.
That's right.
Now that it seems like there probably wouldn't be any hockey before mid-May, You'd think that enhances the chances of him being back at some point at least, whether, it doesn't mean he'd be back in mid-May, and I certainly understand that the fan base would be happy just to see tangible evidence that he's alive.
He's alive. Well, yeah, you and I see him.
Yeah.
And we've seen him for what it's worth for, 2 weeks now? He's been going around with no sling.
But he's kept a relatively low profile from all I can tell. So I think that video is probably the first time that most fans at least have seen him since he was injured.
So here's what I think of when I think of Jake, and this was before the apocalypse began here, and that was Jake comes back. Let's stick with whatever the scenario is now, which is mid-May. Penguins are facing the Flyers. Flyers, of course, aren't what they used to be in terms of wanting to murder you on every other shift, but you'd still be talking about a really rough series. I don't think there's any doubt about that. How do you test / prepare someone like that in what we're talking about now is a 15-day training camp? How do you do that,
You don't, and you don't play him unless the medical people say that his shoulder should be able to withstand, the rigors of playing in a playoff game. Jake Guentzel probably isn't going to retire this summer. He does have a future. The franchise does have a future. Even though the window is starting to close or well on its way to closing for this team.
Not on him.
Yeah,
he's part of your whatever people when they talk about post-Sid, post-Gino, he's front and center.
Right.
He's your star.
Right. So you don't risk the future for the possible short-term benefits. So I think the Penguins are responsible enough that they wouldn't risk him unless the medical people were as certain as you can be. Obviously, there's no guarantees with anybody coming back from any kind of injury.
Now that said, let's say he is, again, everything we're talking about here is hypothetical. Okay, so bear with us here. The Jake Guentzel comes back, and he's himself. What does that do for this roster? I mean, think about it,
Oh, he's obviously their biggest goal-scoring threat. He was averaging one every other game, and he's done that for long enough that it's not a fluke.
And look at the lines. Look what happens to the lines. Now all of a sudden you're moving people to places where they arguably belong better. And I'll throw out another point. I had begun to believe, this was, again, before Jake was hurt, obviously, that because everyone has talked for years and years, and correctly so, that Sidney Crosby makes everybody around him better. I had actually started to form the opinion, and you know what I'm going to say here, that Jake Guentzel made Sidney Crosby better. That it was mutual. I'm not being weird here. But Jake lifted Sid's game to a large extent.
Well, he probably thinks the game about as well as anybody that Crosby has played with, and that's no small feat. I mean,
and Sid's told you that.
Yeah. There have been a lot of guys who have not fit in alongside Crosby, just as there were guys who couldn't fit in with Mario Lemieux. It's not a matter of these centers' individual greatness. It's how that line mate's skills and intellectual hockey capacity meshes
Jake's
with the
through
center.
The roof, yeah.
And that's beyond his physical tools. That's one of his greatest assets is his ability to think the game.
I'll leave everyone with this, especially if you go way back in Penguins history, as this gentleman and I do, that Terry Ruskowski, and boy did I just drop a name. Terry Ruskowski once said that you could score, was it a fire hydrant?
Yeah.
A fire hydrant could score 40 goals skating with Mario. And of course, he was the living proof of that, with all due respect.
That means there are plenty of guys who didn't have the hockey skills of a
fire hydrant. Because Mario, he turned most people into 40 or 50 goal guys.
But not everyone.
Not everyone.